we are in a spiritual war against wickedness from heavenly places. And even in the age of COVID, we know that sin is death, and sin opens you up to demonic attack. And that's why, as people of faith, it's important that we practice our faith correctly. Unfortunately, many of the churches out there are selling us a saved by grace mantra. And so people think that it is enough just to let Jesus into your heart and that you will be saved. How many people have heard those types of sermons before? Being saved by grace versus works, and being a follower of the law. Jesus tells us in Matthew 7:21, "Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven." Jesus tells you that it's not enough to call upon his name. It's not enough to do works in the name of Jesus if you're not doing the will of the Father. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a very important statement, to say the least. We see numerous verses like that in the book of Matthew. "And he said unto him, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is God. But if thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments." Which commandments, ladies and gentlemen? The 10 Commandments, the ordinances that we find in the books of Moses. And so Jesus tells us that the new law is the old law. "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled." And so many people out there are basically practicing their faith as one saved by grace, and that they don't need to follow the law, and that they can live like devils out there, and that all will be forgiven. And truly, these Bible passages tell us quite the contrary. Now, we understand why, some churches are preaching a different message out there, and that's the message that we find in the letters from Paul, which are very powerful. But again, not everyone that saith unto Jesus, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of the Father. And so that is a very important aspect to our faith that we need not neglect. This is about faith versus works. And of course, faith without works is dead. Sin is defined as anything that is contrary to the law, to say the least. And of course, we understand even more than that by looking at what other people have thought about it. But undoubtedly, there is no skirting the law. And it is very important to understand that anyone trying to sell you a different message is really not helping you in this war against spiritual wickedness. Now, of course, none of us are going to make it without mercy. None of us are going to make it without grace. And it is a very important aspect to our religion. But again, faith without works is dead. And sin is what opens up the door to spiritual attack. Sin will essentially suck the life right out of you. And many people are committing sin without even realizing it, especially in the modern world. Most people spend all of their day on themselves. And this is about being selfish. We're a very selfish society. We're taking selfies. We spend all of our time, doing secular worldly things. We spend our time participating in idle talk. And we don't ever really talk about what's spiritual because it's difficult. How do you talk about the spiritual in the secular world? You almost feel awkward these days. And that's really the wrong attitude to have. You need to find an opportunity to evangelize and to talk about faith. And if you can't talk about faith, it's better to talk about nothing at all and to spend that time and enrich yourself in understanding what the Gospels are talking about. It would be much better to listen to preachers or the Gospels on tape in an audio format than to spend your time listening to music or watching a movie or playing video games. So instead of taking selfies, we should be listening to the Gospels. Instead of gossiping, we should be listening to what Jesus actually has to say. And instead of watching the television, we should be reading Scripture. The television really only promotes, negative emotions, negative attributes like anger and jealousy and sadness and pride. But we're called to be humble. We're not called to be arrogant. We're called to be honest. We're not called to tell lies to impress people. And everything you do, every action, every thought, every word that comes out of your mouth is essentially doing something either good or evil, as it is defined in the Bible. And that's a very important thing to understand, because if you're not understanding what you're doing with yourself as you're walking around in the world, then you're contributing to the sin that's in the world, like pollution. You're polluting the planet with sin by not being careful and by not paying attention to what you're doing. And we're all guilty of that. We certainly can't comprehend all of the mechanisms at work in the universe, in this world that we're in. But one thing is for sure, anything that's positive is helpful, and anything that's negative isn't helpful. And so, by watching the television, by participating in politics, we're all angry out there. And that is polluting our environment. It's filling it with sin and more anger, and it just builds and snowballs and turns into an avalanche. And now we're living in a world where everything is locked down and everyone is contaminated with the virus. But how this virus affects you is going to depend on the life that you're living. So if you're always on your phone, you're always watching television, you're always doom scrolling, you're idle talking, gossiping, this virus will have a huge impact on you. And so it's better to evangelize and to be honest and to live a good life as the Bible describes it. Now, speaking of what's going on in churches today, we see that people are essentially, praying to everyone they can, but they're not doing it the way that Jesus teaches them to do it in the Gospels. And so you see people praying to Mary, praying to Jesus, praying to the saints, praying to the angels, if you will. And of course, everybody loves Jesus and Mary and the angels, and that isn't the question. The question is, who are you praying to? Who are you worshiping? What does the Bible say about that? What do the Ten Commandments say about that, ladies and gentlemen? And we're called to worship God and no one else, and that's a very important thing. And we're also told, that there shouldn't be idolatry. Yet we see people essentially worshiping statues of Jesus and Mary in our churches. And that's just doing it the wrong way. Many, many Christians are guilty of that. And that's not what Jesus called you to do. And somehow the message got mixed up in the churches, and whether they're doing that on purpose or by accident is another story, but everyone listening to this should know better, and you should tell people, you should tell Christians, what the right way is. It's right there in the Gospels. And, this ends up being one of the things that really holds us back, because we're not doing it the right way. That, and of course, doubt. Doubt is the main weapon of the dark side. And doubt will keep you in darkness. Never question what's in the Bible. Many people have played that game before, only to eventually realize that the Bible is correct. We're all fed the evolution garbage in the secular schools, and we know that's not right. The DNA tells us that life was designed. It didn't just happen by chance. Nothing here is happening by chance. There's no chance in that. That this is some kind of random thing going on planet Earth. But we'll want to question basically every other verse in the Gospels. Well, how can this be? Or what about that? And this and the other. And that just, derails you from the straight path. And so never question what's in the Scriptures. You might be tempted to, but that's just a trap. So you can automatically push doubt out of the picture by not questioning what is in the Gospels. Leave doubt behind, and you'll see the matrix glitch around you. We're called to be faithful, not only to our spouses, but to our vocation as a practitioner. So don't stray away from that. Don't be tempted by worldly things like, the Tinder and the entertainment. We're not here to be entertained. We're here to worship. That is the point of being created. Believe it or not. And that, is difficult for many people to understand. But that is truly what we're called to do. We're called to worship. We're not called to be entertained. Again, sin is anything and everything that is contrary to the Ten Commandments, contrary to the ordinances that are in the book of Moses. Jesus came as a practicing Jew, taught in the synagogues, and so we're called to be as knowledgeable in the law as he is. We're called to be humble. We're called to be honest, and not to be angry or jealous or sad or a complainer. Don't complain in your prayers. That's the worst thing you can do. Don't be like Adam saying, it's the woman's fault, and all of that. That'll just lead you into trouble. Take responsibility and do the best that you can. It's not easy out there, but the reason that we're talking about this is because sin opens you up to attack in many different ways. And practicing your religion in the wrong way is essentially sin, and it opens you up to attack. And many people just aren't being educated the right way when it comes to what is expected of them. They just hear you're saved by grace, you can do what you want, and everything will be okay. And that isn't the whole story. We survived our previous sins because of grace, because of mercy. But that doesn't mean that you can go out there and do whatever you want and it'll be okay. That is not what the Gospels tell you. And we could have the debate, as far as what Paul was going through when he was evangelizing into, the Hellenistic, countries, trying to, convert pagans and heathens and the like. And we could talk about the liberalism that's there compared to, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and the Old Testament. But if you want to be perfect, if you want to do it right, then you really have to follow the law as it's stated in the books of Moses. And you have to understand what's in, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And, it's on audio. There's, excellent renditions of it on audio on the internet. And you should spend your time listening to that. Spend your free time listening to that instead of trying to entertain yourself with, the doom from Hollywood and the like. That'll get you going in the right direction. But how you spend your time says a lot about you. If you spend all your time just trying to entertain yourself, then that says a lot about you as well. Are you taking it seriously? We'll have to leave it there for this broadcast. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Till the next time, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, you are the resistance.